How was lunch? Excellent. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker after lunch. And so Bryan Helfenbaum is the Vice President of Clean Energy at Alberta Innovates, where he oversees programs in clean technology and advanced hydrocarbons with key initiatives in hydrogen, CCUS, digital energy, hydrocarbon recovery, methane emission reduction, energy storage, grid modernization, critical minerals, geothermal, and bitumen beyond combustion. That's quite a mouthful. Prior to joining Alberta Innovates, he spent 20 years in a variety of technical, business, and innovation roles in the private sector. Bryan has been named a theme leader for the Clean Resource Innovation Network and a fellow/ambassador with the Energy Futures Lab. Bryan's passion for innovation extends outside the office, where he has taught courses at the University of Calgary and worked on innovative community residential development projects. Bryan has a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Waterloo and a master's degree in business administration with a specification in global energy management and sustainability from the University of Calgary. Bryan, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Didn't know you had the long form of that bio. Sorry about that. So it's truly a privilege and an honor to be here, especially because I'm about to frustrate you guys in three ways. The technical expertise in this room is astounding, and I'm going to talk about energy systems modeling, so I'm going to talk about your area at such a superficial level that it's going to cause you some physical pain, so apologies. Second of all, the systems study that I'm going to talk about has unfortunately not yet been cleared for publication, so I'm going to give you some interesting insights, but I'm not going to be able to get to a level of granularity that you're going to crave. And third of all, you just had a big lunch, the eyelids are getting heavy, and I'm going to give you a presentation that isn't going to give you time to blink. So hopefully that'll keep you up. So before I get into the model, we need to talk about context, because context is everything leading into why this is done. And so we're going to talk about energy. And when it comes to energy, here in Alberta and in many places around the world, energy has traditionally looked a lot more like this. And this world, right now, is dealing with a lot of mixed signals. And so let's unpack that a little bit. Starting at the beginning, Canada is blessed with an abundance of oil reserves, third most on the planet, thanks to the oil sands. And when you look at the others in the top 10, based on environmental policy and human rights records, you might assume that Canada would be a preferred supplier to the world. And yet, we have not really seen that play out. But that's okay, because oil sands still makes about 3.5 million barrels a day, so obviously domestically, they still really want us to make oil and gas. And yet, we have this policy that came out a few years ago, and then just yesterday, a new cap was announced on emissions specifically from oil and gas. But that's okay. Industry has said, we got this. We are going to be net zero by 2050. But hang on, does that even matter? Because, like we saw this morning, predictions are that we're going to see a decline, maybe even a very rapid decline in demand for oil in the pretty near future. And this isn't like a Greenpeace chart. This is from BP, an oil producer. But hold on. I mean, look at what oil prices are actually doing. That's the best indicator of demand. And we've seen a pretty significant bounce back from COVID days and holding pretty steady over that period. But, come on. We know that oil and gas is a sunset industry, much in the way that coal has already sunset. And wait, what? So we're in this weird paradigm right now. We have jurisdictions that are very dependent on the royalties, the taxes, the jobs that come from non-renewable resources. Here in Alberta, we set records the last 3 years, and this is what pays for our healthcare, our schools, everything that we need. And yet there is the drive for net zero. It is everywhere. And while Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America to have a carbon price, we were a little behind on declaration of net zero, but we got there, And last year, the Alberta government released an ambition for net zero as well. And there's some great things happening locally. We are now, as of this year, officially coal-free for the first time in 150 years. And so all of this is why people are talking about the energy transition that is underway. But, you know, some people do take issue with the terminology. Is it really a transition that's underway, or is it more of a diversification? This is what Alex Pourbet said a few years ago. Well, let me instruct Alex what's really going on here, because here's the last 200 plus years of history of energy across the globe. And you can see, you know, the tan color is biomass, burning wood, right? That dominated the energy mix, and that transitioned to coal, which transitioned to oil, to natural gas, to hydro, nuclear, renewables, et cetera. And so we have these obvious transitions that are happening. Or do we? If we look at the exact same data, but instead of a relative basis, we make it on an absolute basis, it tells a very different story. We have indeed developed a lot of new technology opportunities, but we just add them. In fact, that traditional biomass, burning wood, it was 99% of the global usage in the early 1800s, and it's now about 5%. But on an absolute basis, it's doubled over that period. So we haven't transitioned off of anything, ever. In fact, none of these are even declining, let alone gone away. So yeah, maybe it's more of a diversification, maybe it's transition. You know what? Potato, potato, I don't really care. That's not even the right question. The question is, how do we maintain our prosperity while simultaneously moving to a net zero world? That's what we need to answer. And it's going to be tough, because there is no silver bullet out there. We have a really complex energy mix here. We have a lot of different sources and a lot of end uses. And, you know, damn it, consumers are saying, I want my energy to be clean. But I also still want it to be affordable, reliable, and safe. I'm not willing to relinquish any of those. So I want all of these, and that's actually really tough to pull off, things that meet all those. Plus, jurisdictions have to deal with the natural resources that they have available. As we heard this morning, location, location, location. We're not going to run Alberta on large-scale hydro, the way some other provinces have, because we don't have that resource. Similarly, rooftop solar doesn't do so well in Vancouver. You also can't put small modular nuclear in British Columbia because they have policies against it, much like the country of Italy and some other jurisdictions. Right, and that stems from the broader problem of the NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. And the social acceptance that's required to actually do energy development. And if you look at our ability to do large-scale energy development in most parts of the world right now, it's not just NIMBY, it's banana. And if you don't know banana, banana is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. It is really hard to do large-scale energy development projects. Okay, so let's get back to CO2. The fundamental question that I want to address is the how. How do we actually get to a net zero energy system? Right? There's a lot of talk about the need to do it, but how do we actually do it in a realistic way? So we built a model, right? Everyone in this room can attest to that. We contracted with a company called Navius Research out of Vancouver. They've done similar energy modeling. Now, of course, as everyone here knows full well, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And of course, the reason for that is that every model, and especially an energy systems model like this, is just assumptions layered on assumptions layered on assumptions. And so we really had a big challenge ahead of us to be able to model all these different technologies and policies to be able to produce something credible. So we put together an 18-member advisory committee. It was comprised of experts from industry, from oil and gas and oil sands, from utilities, electricity producers, distributors, and government, municipal government, provincial, federal, as well as some experts from think tanks. And we got them to go into a lot of detail on 27 different abatement technologies that we identified. I'm going to go through these into more detail shortly. But we took those 27 technologies, applied them across 3 different policy frameworks, and varied 4 primary variable sensitivities, like the price of oil. You do the math, that gives you 324 modeling scenarios that we looked at. And I'm going to share with you some of those outputs shortly, but I'll say, spoiler alert, pretty much everything on that list is relevant. Equally relevant? No. But it really creates this aha moment of it's not an either or, but it's an all of the above. And we really need components of everything to be able to get there. So that's exciting, it's uplifting, but it's also terrifying because some of the things on this list are not really at commercial stage. We still have a lot of innovation to do to get these to a commercial-ready state. And so I'm going to talk through the different technologies that went into the model and the different levels, stages of maturity that they're at. And I'll use this handy little diagram. I'm not going to bother with these old guys of coal and wood. As I said earlier, they're still very relevant in a global context, but in an Alberta one, they're not relevant anymore. So we'll focus on these middle-aged guys, and of course, the most prominent of those is oil and gas. And there is just a plethora of innovation activity underway to decarbonize, to reduce emissions in our oil and gas. Solvent applied to our oil sands. This is something that we were doing simulations 20, 30 years ago, and now we have pilots and finally first commercial opportunities. There's 2 or 3 large-scale commercial projects that are now underway, and this is replacing steam with solvent, so a lower energy intensity, which leads to lower greenhouse gas emissions. And then we have a little more exotic opportunities. This is Accelaware that is using microwave radiation to heat the subsurface rather than solvent or rather than steam. Now, again, I could spend an entire presentation talking about oil and gas opportunities. There is a lot underway. The industry has already dropped the emissions intensity by about 20% over the last 10 years. The next area, of course, is renewables. And some people still think of this as a new area, but honestly, we have wind farms in Alberta that are now aging out after 25 years of operation. So this is not new at all. What is new is the roller coaster ride we've been on from a policy perspective. Just a couple years ago, Alberta was the leader in Canada. We have world-class wind and solar resource here, and we attracted 3/4 of all the renewable investment in the country just into this one province. But then we had a moratorium on development due to landowner concerns. That moratorium is now lifted, and it remains to be seen whether industry is going to come back hard or not. But regardless, renewables are going to be an important part of our energy future. Now, when we talk about emissions reduction opportunity, and I don't need to convince you guys, the elephant in the room is always going to be carbon capture, utilization, and storage. I have not seen a credible study that achieves net zero without a major component of CCUS. And we are very fortunate here to have all of the key ingredients. We have investment tax credits from the federal government. We have incentives from the provincial government, able to layer those together. We have the pore space, we have the infrastructure, we have the expertise. Shame on us if we are not world leaders in CCUS. We have the opportunity to do some huge opportunities here. This is Pathway's $15 billion project, still awaiting final investment decision. There are some smaller projects that are starting to move along. So an exciting space, a commercial space. Many jurisdictions look with envy on us, and we don't necessarily appreciate that sometimes. We've been at this at a commercial scale for quite a long time already. All right, now let's get into some of the more emerging areas of opportunity, some of the more interesting ones that maybe you don't know as well. The challenge when you get into the emergent areas is the hype curve, right? Things get shiny and exciting, and there's a lot of hype, and then people realize, oh, maybe this isn't quite as good as we thought, and then it kind of reaches a plateau of productivity. So the different technologies are at different stages on the hype cycle, if you will. And to me, the poster child of hype right now is our friend hydrogen. Right? Hydrogen is an energy carrier that is often cited as the Swiss Army knife. When you talk to some people, it's this kind of Swiss Army knife because it can do everything, right? We use it in petrochemicals and refining today, but if we're using it in an industrial setting there, well, why can't we use it for industrial heat in our oil sands? And if we can use it for industrial heat, well, let's use it for residential heat. Most of our appliances could actually run hydrogen instead of natural gas. And what about mobility? We can convert trucks, we convert buses, trains. Canada Pacific CP Rail is actually converting their 6th locomotive right now. I got to ride on their first one. That was kind of cool. And power generation. So hydrogen is a compelling concept, but just because you can doesn't always mean you should. And so we need to figure out where hydrogen actually makes sense. And compounding that is hydrogen's dirty little secret, which is water. Hydrogen uses a lot of water. It varies depending on the technology, ATR versus pyrolysis, electrolysis, and SMR, et cetera, but it uses a lot of water. In the greater Edmonton area, we have access to water. And so we have a really strong hydrogen hub being developed. But just 3 hours south in Calgary kind of exists in drought conditions most of the time, and we will have big challenges trying to develop hydrogen at that same rate. Next is geothermal, right? I talked about wind and solar that are much more commercial. Geothermal in an Alberta context, our rock is warm, it's not hot, given the thermal gradient, so you've got to go either very, very deep, or you've got to get pretty creative. And I think our keynote speaker tonight is actually from this company, so I won't get into it in detail, but geothermal represents a lucrative opportunity because, damn it, we know how to make holes, right? So, and we know how to move fluids. How much more is there? No, I don't want to say that. Next up is biofuels, and there's always a lot of hype around biofuels. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Again, location dependent. We have the biodiesel cycle and renewable natural gas. We're seeing mandates for RNG. And again, this is not just theoretical. We have actual projects. This is the Energi facility that operated outside of the Edmonton landfill. It was converting municipal solid waste into methanol and ethanol. And it ran for about 5 years and is now being commercialized elsewhere. Other opportunity is nuclear, but not so much this nuclear, but the small modular nuclear reactors. Here in Alberta, we are not a nuclear jurisdiction, unlike some of our cousins in Ontario, but we are nuclear curious, right? If you're looking for large-scale, non-emitting baseload power, it's a pretty short list. And so nuclear needs to be in consideration. Then there's digital. The digital space is going bananas right now. And so this is our data value chain that we use internally. It has all your favorite buzzwords of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and drones, and VR, AR, blockchain, et cetera. And there is just a ton going on in this space right now in application to the energy industry. So all of those green ellipses are projects that we're funding through Alberta Innovates that are applying AI, ML, and other technologies to improve our emissions profile. And they're real, and it's exciting. It's incremental, but layered on, it can have a material impact. The problem is, as we're hearing more about, is the digital space is a bit of a double-edged sword, because we're now starting to see the front end of growth in data centers and AI and crypto and the energy demand that that's going to cause. There are opportunities. This is an interesting recent article in the last month of Microsoft trying to at least turn to non-emitting power by restarting the 3 Mile Island reactor, not the one that melted down, but the other one. So interesting to see. We really are at the front end of this trend, and we'll see how quickly it develops. Then there's direct air capture. Rather than taking it out of the flue stack, taking carbon dioxide out of thin air at pretty dilute concentrations. I have to admit, I personally am very skeptical on the economics of this and whether this is going to fly. However, life has taught me that I am not always correct. And so there are different views out there, right? Occidental bought Carbon Engineering, which was based out of BC for over $1 billion. And locally, Deep Sky is setting up a DAC test facility just north of Calgary to be able to do some DAC testing. So pretty exciting. I mean, the engineer in me loves it. The economist in me is kind of skeptical. But it'll be great to see how this develops. I'm a bit more bullish on BECCS, which is Bioenergy CCS. This is a carbon negative technology to couple the bioenergy opportunity with the CCS opportunity. And this is one of the few true negative technologies out there, negative emissions technologies out there. So it's pretty exciting, pretty early, but there are some projects that are starting to go. Okay, that takes me to the baby here. And for this one, I need to zoom out a little bit and kind of talk about what's happening at a global scale, because what's driving a lot of our challenges today is really just population growth, right? We're sitting here with roughly 8 billion people on the planet, and we are going to have 10 billion people on the planet in 25 years, right? That's a growth of 2 billion people. That's as many people as there were on the planet in the 1930s, like not that long ago. That is just a tremendous amount of demand that is going to happen. Compounding that is the prosperity problem. We do not have a world where everyone gets to have equal prosperity, and we need to move and lift billions of people out of poverty. And so what is it that a growing population and a prosperous population needs? Well, they need energy. We talk about that a lot, but they also need stuff. They need housing and roads and infrastructure and consumer goods. And we don't talk about this enough. And what is it that a lot of this stuff is actually made of? Carbon. Wait a second. We've got a lot of carbon. So, thought experiment here. You know, right now, oil sands, vast resource, it's actually a terrible feedstock for making fuels, but that's what we do with it because that's where the demand is right now. It's hydrogen poor and carbon rich, which makes it that terrible feedstock. But if instead of converting it into fuels, we instead think about it from a materials perspective, well, suddenly that vulnerability becomes a strategic advantage, right? We have this moniker out there of the low carbon economy. It's unfortunate because what we really mean is keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. No one out there is protesting your carbon fiber bike or the development of graphene, right? Sequestered carbon is okay. The low carbon economy refers to the atmosphere. And so this is where we coined, several years ago, a program we call Bitumen Beyond Combustion. And so the concept is very simple. Rather than converting bitumen into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, etc., let's take some or most or a portion of that barrel and divert it into products that the world needs today and especially the world needs in the future. Carbon fiber, asphalt binder, activated carbon, carbon nanotubes, graphene, right? Huge opportunities. This is a really exciting innovation opportunity because it does both reduce your emissions and simultaneously increase the value of your barrel. To give you one quick case study, let's take carbon fiber, right? From an emission standpoint, it's a triple win because we are diverting bitumen from being combusted, so we eliminate those scope 3 emissions, and we don't have a lot of technologies that address scope 3. We also, based on a U of A study, are making a carbon fiber that is half as emissions intensive as carbon fiber that you currently buy. So we're making a cleaner fiber. And then finally, we believe that we can make a carbon fiber that's half the cost of current carbon fiber, which unlocks a whole bunch of new industries. And there are a lot of examples, but the classic one is the automotive industry. If we can start deploying cheap carbon fiber into vehicles, we lightweight those vehicles, and whatever's powering those vehicles, we have a more efficient process. And then on the economic side, it's also a triple win, right? So that carbon fiber that we're making increases the value of your barrel by $116, just for that 20% of the barrel you hive off. When you take that 20% heavy ends off the barrel, you're left with a lighter barrel, and that lighter barrel fetches a premium of $10 per barrel. The biggest opportunity, though, here is that economic multiplier effect. When you take a low-cost, low-emissions carbon fiber and make it available to a jurisdiction and all the industries that are going to spring up and be able to use it. Here's me and my hockey stick. It's the first carbon fiber hockey stick made from Alberta bitumen. And I was kind of talking to Larry and Bob at the break here. We kind of did this for shits and giggles. Hockey sticks is not a market we are trying to get into. It's a terrible market for us to pursue. But the symbolic value in Canada, holy cow, I unveiled it and I had politicians running at me, grabbing it out of my hand and taking photo ops with it. Because politicians aren't always the most imaginative. If you show them strands in a petri dish, they can't always imagine what it could be. But now we have a hockey stick, we have a truck mirror, we have a steering wheel. And those are real prototypes. So it's really exciting stage right now. That's just carbon fiber, right? There's also asphalt binder, right? It's at the other end of the sexy scale, perhaps, something we don't talk about very much. But honestly, whether we're powering our vehicles with gasoline or electricity or hydrogen or our own feelings of self-righteousness, whatever we're powering our vehicles with, they need to drive on something, and there is no reasonable alternative to asphalt. It has a very predictable and very large growth rate. Okay, so that was a bit of a divergence to kind of go through the different technologies that are in this model. Because what we want to do is get the model to achieve a net zero Alberta, and we have 324 different modeling scenarios looking at these 27 different abatement. So at long last, let me share with you what I think are the top 8 insights from this model that we built. And again, I recognize people in this room don't all hail from Alberta. My hope is that this as a case study would have some relevance for other jurisdictions as well. Insight number 1, right? And this kind of dispelled a myth right away, which is that the Alberta economy grew in every 2050 net zero scenario. So this concept that the pursuit of net zero is going to absolutely destroy the economy is a bit of a false thing. Now, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the background, right? This isn't just looking at the pursuit of net zero, but it's to say that that pursuit, and oil price and other things still matter, but we don't see value destruction in a major way by pursuing a net zero opportunity. We're building up new industries, new value, new jobs. Similarly, insight number 2, a concern is often, well, can people afford it at the household level? Are we going to drive up the cost of energy to the point where people have to choose between energy and food? And we don't really see that. In fact, we saw the price of energy as a proportion of household coming down over time. Again, there's other things going on. Households get wealthier over time. So this is not in isolation of that. It's looking at the big picture. But in general, a bit of a red herring to say that the pursuit of net zero is necessarily going to make energy unaffordable for a person. Could there be blips in time? Absolutely. You see a little one there. But over the long haul, we don't expect it to be an issue. Okay, now let's get into the technologies. And the first one that jumped out at me as we went through the model was the enhanced oil recovery opportunity. This is really a low-lying fruit, especially in Alberta, because we have the infrastructure, we have all those things, except policy, because unfortunately some federal policy excludes EOR, but we have everything else in place to be able to take that CO2 and monetize it. And storage, you only really get revenue out of carbon credits, whereas EOR, you actually make a less carbon-intensive barrel. And so we see the EOR opportunity really with potential for large-scale opportunity here, really taking off in the next few years with all the right ingredients in place. Insight number 4 relates to that bitumen beyond combustion opportunity. This changed everything for Alberta oil sands in particular. When we did modeling without this module, oil sands were the first barrel to go in a net zero scenario. With this module in place, it becomes the last barrel standing. Navius actually didn't believe it. They delayed the project by 3 months. They were convinced that they had broken their model. Something was wrong. They spent literally 3 months trying to fix it before finally realizing and admitting that this was real. Then they started to call up their recent clients and tell them, the modeling we did for you is wrong. We didn't have this BBC module in it. And so that was pretty cool because, frankly, Alberta Innovates has been talking about this opportunity for a while. To see that validated was really amazing. And so this growth opportunity, and the concept here, right, is if we move into a world where the demand for transportation fuels is starting to go down, but the demand for asphalt remains stable, then it really starts to drive this solution. Because lighter oils, which are advantaged today, are not good feedstock for asphalt. And so you start to shift your mix more towards the heavies, and it advantages oil sands in Alberta. Insight number 5 is about power, the power side. And what we see is roughly a 50-50 split between natural gas and renewables. It takes a bit of time. Renewables needs battery technologies to advance a bit further to be able to, materially increase their share of the mix. But we see basically abated natural gas combined cycle and renewables sharing. To me, what's interesting about this one is what's not there, and that's nuclear. And so in our particular model runs, we didn't see nuclear as having a major role in electricity in Alberta, based on the assumptions we had. Nuclear did show up. It showed up for large-scale industrial heat. So nuclear for heat, but not for electricity. So an interesting observation. We need to play a little bit with the model to see what's that trigger where nuclear becomes a thing for power. Insight number 6, not surprisingly around CCUS, right? The opportunity is massive. In fact, it represents an opportunity for Alberta to be net negative on emissions to offset other parts of the country that are unable to achieve net zero. And so we see this very significant build out of CCUS, right? And this aligns with a lot of what we've heard today. Insight number 7 relates to hydrogen. Hydrogen is very dependent on production cost. And so we see a variety of scenarios here, but mainly where it wins is on heavy mobility, right? So replacing gasoline and diesel made a lot of sense, and we're seeing that build out with trucks and buses and trains happening right now. We didn't see it in power. We didn't see it in a lot of other cases. Some amount of blending with natural gas, the high-thane opportunity, but really heavy mobility is where it made the most sense for hydrogen deployment. And then finally, insight number 8 is our friend direct air capture. So when you do energy systems modeling, DAC is like a drug, right? As soon as it gets a little bit of DAC, it wants as much DAC as possible, because DAC represents an opportunity to basically change nothing. We can just keep doing the status quo and just take it out of the atmosphere after. So we actually ran the model without DAC even being available to make sure we could get some credible answers. And then we looked at different reference cases. So delayed it out a bit until it kind of has additional technology development and is able to get to a cost that is reasonable. But DAC is definitely an opportunity that deserves further investment to see whether this is going to be a solution or not. So those are kind of the key takeaways. Again, it's a tease. I'm not giving you the granularity that you're wanting. But you know, this is the challenge before us. We need to achieve net zero while simultaneously preserving our quality of life, or hopefully enhancing it. So holy cow, the stakes are high. The stakes are really high. And so it's incumbent on all of us to figure this out together. Thank you. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions.
We've got 1:16, so I think we do have time for a few questions.
Okay. I'll take any softball questions you've got.
Okay, so we'll take questions from the room.
Yeah, thanks
so
a lot. You really kept us alive. And with the blink, you were 5 slides away. It was really excellent. So how do you consider soft part of the business into these extremely technical algorithms, like societal perspectives, sensitivities, cultures? In Europe, we are concerned about onshore activities, not offshore, for example. And these could also influence our decisions and policies.
Yeah, great question. I didn't get into it. The Navius model is really built on consumer behavior modeling more than just what's the best technical solution. So it actually looks at how consumers make decisions on things and the social acceptance of these other items. And so that's probably a factor as why nuclear didn't show up, because as a non-nuclear jurisdiction, it's like, frankly, it's less of a technical challenge and more of a regulatory and stakeholder acceptance challenge around nuclear. So it's in there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of detail behind that I can't get into right now, but that it is based on kind of a consumer selection behavioral model.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sebastian.
Yeah, same university, it's very similar question. Great talk, thank you very much. One quick comment, so your number one insight, that the economy is going to continue to grow. There's a study from Oxford University on our side of the pond 2 years ago, and they came to exactly the same conclusion. The faster the more you invest, the quicker you invest. In every scenario, you're always going to make, the economy is going to grow faster. The question I had is, do you think access to critical raw materials for the energy transition could throw a huge spanner to the works? You think rare earth elements are pretty much owned by China. Cobalt comes all out of Congo. So where do we get the critical raw materials from, especially if we have to deal with countries where political governance like Congo is a bit more tricky and less reliable, for example?
Yeah, great point. And absolutely, supply chain for critical minerals is going to be front and center for the next while. One of the technologies I didn't get into was the petrolithium opportunity in Alberta in particular. We have a massive lithium resource, but it's in dilute concentrations in our saline water. There's a number of pilots underway looking at different membrane technologies to extract that. But that's just one example. There are numerous critical minerals that are going to be important. And so that's why in the model, the battery technology was pushed off a bit to be able to recognize some of the technical and political challenges that will be ahead to secure minerals. And we need those battery technologies to then enable the renewables build out over time. So we see that delayed, unfortunately, and yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's going to be a challenge and very difficult to model and predict.
Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you for the info about the Oxford study. I wasn't aware of that.
Apostolos.
Thank you for the talk. You're practically speaking to the converted here, so I don't think you have a tough crowd. I agree with 99% of what you said. There is only
Can we talk about the 99%?
No. There's nothing bad. And the thing that we have to remember is that you guys, as Alberta Innovates, are also funding research, right?
Correct.
So, and that's very important to keep in mind. So in your slide with the Athabasca barrel, that you show us that we can take 20% of that goo and make it into asphalt and nanofibers and everything, you don't have an arrow for the 80%. And you don't have an arrow for the 80%, and that implies that we are committed to use the 80% as fuel. So my comment is, why don't we try and put an arrow there to find other uses for the 80%, so we can get the heavy oil and the light oil and the condensate and everything else contribute to that growth?
You are also preaching to the converted. We have talked about that. We've been focused on the heavier end because that's obviously an easier feedstock for materials. But we've certainly talked about how the lighter ones could ultimately go into those same materials or towards hydrogen or to something else. We've even looked at the economic, like, does it make sense to take out the barrel, remove the 20%, and then re-inject the 80% light oil underground if that market has evaporated on us? And there's actually a business case for that even. But you're right, there's a huge opportunity there to repurpose what we do with that. And that's something that's not just key to Alberta and Alberta Innovates, but that's a challenge for the planet right now.
So Bryan, 2 questions online, and I'll have my last comment anyway. One of our board members, Energy Simulation, Bob Gautner, has got a question. If we're having question, is anybody talking about the demand side? Is anybody thinking about a kinder, gentler way of looking at this part of the problem?
So it's a great point. Most of the study, most of the work done really is supply side focused, and the demand side is where you can make big strides because of all the efficiencies in that pipeline of opportunity. We built into the model, we have some semblance of an energy efficiency gradient over time, as we expect people to be deploying those. And we have heat pumps, and there were some other modules in there that I didn't get into in the presentation. The demand side has not really changed materially over time, unfortunately, and so we rightly or wrongly are focused on solutions on the supply side. So I don't have a great answer, but it's
Okay.
good to acknowledge.
One question from Catherine Hickson, who's related to Geothermal Canada and Alberta #1 Terrapin. She enjoyed your presentation, especially the carbon fiber hockey stick, which I would like to buy one eventually. But a comment is basically talking about geothermal is related to power generation. In a way, it's overhyped. So if we talk about geothermal energy, there's 40 to 70 degrees Celsius kind of geothermal energy available at relatively low cost because of drilling depths are only about 2 kilometers or less. And you said Albertans know how to drill. So is that something we should be looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I only had time for so much. Geothermal in an Alberta context is not a huge opportunity space, but it's real, and there are use cases that are important. And indeed, similar to my new Swiss friends at the table there, we see it more in the geothermal to heat as opposed to geothermal to power.
Correct.
And so there are a variety of use cases, but they're a bit more niche as opposed to kind of large-scale opportunities for Alberta. There are other parts of the world where geothermal could be a larger part of the power mix, but in an Alberta context, we see it more as kind of a heat utilization opportunity for industrial purposes.
Okay. I'll ask one more question. Considering the global audience that we've got here, our chairs worldwide, and 600 some odd people potentially online eventually are looking at our YouTube videos and whatnot. How would Alberta, being a leader in this space anyway, collaborate with its researchers and industry people and gathering thoughts and communicating what we've got?
Yeah, great question. We are open for business. We do a lot of things great here, but we do not have a monopoly on smart people and facilities. And case in point is carbon fiber. Like, we are super hyped about the carbon fiber opportunity. Do you know of anyone in Canada who is a carbon fiber expert? Right? We don't have the industry here. And so we are working with DITF out of Germany, with Deakin University in Australia. We dabbled a little bit with Oak Ridge National Labs in the US, right? So South Korea, looking around the world for expertise. And that applies to all these areas. And so we do have the ability, so even as Alberta Innovates, we do have funding programs. We can work with cross-border opportunities. We like to take the technology and pilot it in Alberta, so there needs to be a benefit to Alberta for it. But we recognize that there's laboratories around the world that are doing things that, and we just simply don't have that either expertise or facilities in-house. And so we're starting to build it up. But if, obviously I touched on a wide breadth of opportunity, and if you're involved in a technology development, we focus on TRL 3 to 7. And so if you're looking to move that along and there's a context for Alberta, give me a call. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on the web. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. So, on behalf of Energy Simulation, Bryan, thank you for your thought-provoking and thorough presentation. It's going to build on the next 2.5 days in terms of what we're going to be talking about and where we're going to go. So, thank you, Bryan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Awesome.